Great. So thank you everyone for joining this webinar on Keeping the Music Playing, Libraries, Music and Intellectual Property, a joint event organised by the International Association of Music Libraries, Archives and Documentation Centres and the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. The occasion for this event is World Intellectual Property Day, which this year has chosen to focus on feeling the beat of IP, and that's an allusion to the importance of intellectual property for music and for the importance of intellectual property for music. It's really welcome to be here today with colleagues in particular from the International Association of Music Libraries, Archives and Documentation Centres in order to explore a little bit more about the role of libraries in working with music, the contributions that they make to a healthy music ecosystem, both in terms of supporting creation, supporting creators, but also making sure that music is accessible. And then in particular to dig into some of those questions around how copyright plays a role, how copyright determines what's possible, what may be needed in order to help make sure that libraries really are fulfilling their potential here. I'm joining you as Stephen Weiber, Director for External Affairs at the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions based in the Netherlands. We are the global organisation for libraries of all sorts, including music libraries, of course, with a mission both to provide a space for professionals, interested people around the world to come together, to share, to build, to create, to set standards, to innovate, but also to work at the global level to really try and be the voice of libraries in global processes, including, of course, the World Intellectual Property Organization. Through our webinar today, we're really going to be talking with professionals, with practitioners in two main parts. Firstly, to understand some of those different roles, the different activities that libraries carry out, music, and then to dig into questions around copyright and how it works, how it might work better. I'll introduce the speakers in a short while, but as you will have heard, we are recording this session in order to make it available for people at other times. There's no time of the day that works for everyone around the world, but we're certainly willing and looking forward to sharing this. Secondly, of course, please do, if you have questions, we hope we'll have time for this at the end, please use the questions and answers function that you should see in the bar at the bottom of the screen in order to ask any questions, and then we'll take those at the end. Just very briefly to introduce the speakers who we have with us, and I'll let them talk a little bit more about themselves, and of course their biographies are up on the website. I'm very happy to say we have a good international selection. We have Carla Williams from Ohio University Libraries in the US, Kathleen De Laurenti at the Arthur Freetime Library in Baltimore, also in the US. We have Enrique Monfort Sanchez at Palau de la Música de Valencia in Spain, and then Niels Mark from Odense City Library in Denmark. They'll be able to introduce themselves better, and I'm very keen not to spend too long talking myself here. So I think we're going to really turn over to the first major question that we have, which is effectively for you to talk a little bit from your own experience about what you do, and your role around music, your contribution to that really healthy music ecosystem. And with that, I'd like to first ask Carla to take the floor.
Okay, hello everyone. I am, as he said, Carla Williams. I'm the music librarian at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. I direct the operations of the Music and Dance Library, and I'm also the chair of the Music and Libraries and Music Teaching Institutions section for the International Association of Music Libraries, Archives, and Documentation Centers. The Libraries and Music Teaching Institutions section, or IAML, focuses on topics of special interest to librarians who work at educational establishments that teach music. It provides an international platform to communicate, to exchange knowledge, and to discuss all aspects of music libraries that are embedded in music teaching institutions. LIMT works in collaboration with other IAML sections to improve information literacy, to support and facilitate research, and to promote awareness of library collections. Music libraries support music teaching institutions in many ways, from accreditation to information literacy to archiving recital and concert recordings. LIMT has been involved in various projects that help music libraries in their supporting roles. For example, sorry about my cat, she's really loud. For example, from 2011 to 2014, LIMTI oversaw a project group that examined the issue of quality assurance in music libraries as a criterion in the accreditation process. As another example, in research support, LIMTI conducted a survey on the uses of open educational resources for music in YAML member libraries, and the results were then presented in the 2023 YAML Congress in Cambridge. More recently, in the 2024 YAML Congress in Stellenbosch, South Africa, LIMTI collaborated with two other sections, cataloging and metadata, and service and training, to organize and sponsor 3 sessions related to electronic scores. The first, E-Scores in Music Libraries, Part 1, had to do with acquisitions and cataloging and discussed developing metadata workflows for E-Scores. E-Scores in Music Libraries Part 2 covered access and the user experience. 3 presenters spoke about digital scores in circulation, advocacy, and licensing priorities. The third and final session of the series was a panel discussion about the future of e-scores in music libraries. As a result of these sessions, LIMTI decided to propose the creation of a project group to the YAML board. We feel that the music libraries are at the forefront of providing access to digital scores for research, performance, and education. We also acknowledge that the rapid shift toward electronic scores has brought complex licensing challenges for music libraries. Because of this, the project group will aim to establish best practices for electronic score licensing, specifically tailored to the needs of music libraries. Other objectives include promoting collaboration between libraries, composers, publishers, and educational institutions, as well as advocating for equitable access, for transparency and clarity in electronic score licensing for music libraries. The project group will focus on the unique needs and challenges of music libraries, including licensing models, copyright compliance, fair compensation, technology standards, and user education. Our proposal was presented to the YAML board in November of 2024. It was received favorably and likely will be voted on by the General Assembly at the 2025 YAML Congress in Salzburg, Austria. There are, as you know, many challenges with copyright and licensing, particularly in music libraries and archives, which Kathleen will discuss in more detail later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. And I think especially appreciating having got up quite early in the morning to do this one. And thank you also. This is also such a good example of the role of library associations in providing a space for addressing challenges that too often we risk having to face alone, and trying to find solutions in that way. So thank you. I'm now going to hand over to Niels in Odense to talk a little bit about your work in Odense Public Library.
Yeah, my name is Niels Mark, and I am chair of the public library section in YAML, which is, as you also said, it's the shortage of International Association of Music Libraries, Archives, and Documentation Centers. And I will talk a bit about how we work with the copyright and how we work with music in my music library in Odense. Odense is one of the biggest libraries in Denmark. It is the biggest in Denmark, and it has a collection which is about the biggest in the northern region. And our focus is to, of course, to have a lot of focus on the physical collection. And we also have a lot of focus on partnerships and doing a lot about the layouts of growth. So that's a very important part of it. And in a moment, I will show you my PowerPoint slides, where we'll talk a bit about our strategies and how we actually work with both doing the promotion of upcoming artists and also do something about the collections. So I'll share my PowerPoint right now. Does it get through now?
Yes, that's it.
That's good. Great. So as I said before, the vision of the Odense Music Library is, as you can see here, we aim to play a central role in the musical ecosystem, where we actually try to develop ideas from the layer of growth, both locally, regionally, and nationally, because we have like a very big, wide range and attention, because we are the biggest in Denmark. And the strategies we work with, I will present that during this PowerPoint show here. One of them is a musical greenhouse, where we are making a creative space for children and people who really want to do something about music, to help them flourish into their musical journeys. And then we have a lot of focus on doing some partnerships and doing collaboration with the community, and that's both locally and nationally. And then together with all these partnerships, we are very much aware of doing something innovative in our events, not to compete with concert venues in Odense or somewhere else. We try to develop new ideas together with upcomings, but also, of course, with professional artists or musicians. And then the last thing I will take up as a strategy is how we are very much focused on bringing our physical collection into our arrangements, and how we can do that. Of course, it's my personal opinion that the physical collection of a music library is our core task. I mean, we do a lot of things, but what people actually know us for is our great collection. That is also the reason why we keep our collection in Odense, and we actually collect a lot of materials from other libraries in Denmark. When they don't want to get it, we get it. So we have got a very, very huge collection. And we are very much aware of always trying to get that into play when we do something. So in the first part, I will just talk about our musical greenhouse, the thing about doing something for children and talents, people who are wanting to do something with music, no matter whether they are completely new, have never had a guitar in their hand, but also something who are working with more professionally. We are very much aware of that. We work with what we call a 3-stage rocket, which is where there's 3 steps. The first step is our instrument zone, which is a room where you can go and play all the kinds of instruments you're interested to, and that is open for everyone, both for children and for professional musicians, students, and everything. And then we got the next stage is the recording studio, where the idea is that when you have learned to play instruments, you can come in and do some productions. And we've got some sound technicians who help for free. And that way, we actually hope that we can help people promote their music. And we have a lot of success with that, both with professional musicians, but also with people who just are very upcoming. And then the third step is our concert stage. We have a lot of concerts at the music library, at least 3 a week, and also talks. So it's a stage where we have a lot of activities. One of the very good concepts we have is a weekly concept with our local music conservatory in Odense, where talents from the conservatory comes over and play for 1 hour at the music on the stage, and that's really popular both for the musicians, because it's a kind of safe place for them to try to develop their aim of performing. And it's also, of course, a really good experience for the audience, because it's so talented people coming from there. So that's our 3-stage rocket, how we actually try to make people go from upcoming or from a very new beginners to hopefully to rising talents. And the next strategy I talked about is the innovative thinking of events through partnerships. We have done quite a few, but some of them we try to do is something that you do not normally see in other kinds of concert venues. One of the examples in that was some sleep concerts we do occasionally. It's a kind of cross media between arts, meditation, and electronic music. The idea is that people is lying on mattresses and listening to the music, to the live music. It's some electronic musicians who play the music over the 9 hours. It's a kind of very chilling ambient music, which makes it very chill for people to try to sleep. So it's what they call lucid dreaming, where you actually balance between being awake and being asleep. And then there's some meditation in between. So we actually try to reach different target groups. And some of the third concerts we had was really, really popular. We got the tickets sold in seconds. We had 750,000 interactions on Facebook and 12,000 trying to get the tickets, with only 100 available. So it was a huge success, very much interested in it. And that we did with upcoming artists. It was a very good place for upcoming artists to be part of this and then get a lot of attention, because the event got a lot of attention. And that is actually what we very much hope for, to make like a healthy ecosystem by trying to promote very newcomers within electronic music in this case, and other kinds of music in other cases. We ended up doing a sleep concert album together with a label, so you could actually use the sleep concert in your bedroom, and that was also very good experience, a very good collaboration with a German label, by the way. We also do something where bands come and play together. We had 2 jam sessions where 2 bands were playing together for 6 hours. They get on and off, so they had breaks in between, and the audience could walk in between while they were playing. So they were not actually on the stage, they were just playing around the people. It was called the 6 Portals, and that was live recorded. We actually hoped to release it, but of course, because of copyright, it was not possible. So, that's a good example of what you can also do. We have some professional recording system in our room, so we can actually do some really good high quality recordings of concerts. We actually, as soon as last Wednesday, we had this extreme music from Japan. This is an older poster you see right here, but we have it like every year where we invite people from Japan who has a really interesting electronic music scene within noise and sound art. They come over and do concert at our place, and we invite upcoming artists from the local area and from the rest of Denmark to come and be part of this. Again, so to reach some attention and make some kind of also put focus on kind of underground culture of things that people might not know. We combine it with food and with drinks, Japanese food and Japanese drinks, so people actually get more interest in getting there. It's a very good way of getting people curious when there's food and drinks in between. Another example is our Expo Robotics, which is a festival. This is built on the background that Odense is actually a robot city. We have got a lot of robot industries and companies in Odense. So therefore, we have made this festival of robot culture, where we have the music library invite with other concert places, professional musicians. We had Kraftwerks at Wolfgang Flür a couple of years ago, and we also invite people from the conservatory who works with electronic music. And the guy you see above, the young guy, he was playing as a warm-up for Kraftwerk, and it actually ended up that he came on a tour afterwards in England with Wolfgang Flür from Kraftwerk. So that's a very good example of how we can actually help coming up artists to get through to other places to do venues. We also work with what we call takeover, where local artists and musicians can come and actually take over the room and actually create their ideas and festival themselves. We do the frames, but they actually get the free hands to develop. We had this kind of art and music festival over 2 days, where it was like you could see art performance, which was part of it, and we had some really interesting music concert as well. And that was actually made not by us, but we invited people to develop it themselves. That's why we call it takeover. As I said, we're very much aware of the collection. We think it's really important to keep the collection alive, because that's a very important part of the library, to keep the physical collection alive, even though we are very much into the digital streaming media age. It's good to keep it alive. We do it, for example, with a horror festival, where we have a lot of exhibitions with materials, and we combine it, the music, with literature and with films and board games and VR. The idea is we actually put some attention of the music in cross media with other things. Plus, we also exhibit a lot of our materials over the festival. We have extreme metal concerts in the same manner, so that's a part of it. So we do concerts in the same context within this festival that normally takes 4 days of horror. Another way we do it is that because we, as said, have a very large also LP collection, we have saved our LP collection for many, many years since the 60s. So that's why we have a really big collection. And that means that we have had foreign people from other countries to come and visit us to explore our collection. One of them was DJ Spin Cycle, which is a great an American DJ and radio master who came over. He has been over for 4 times actually to look at our folk music in that basement, because you cannot find it on the internet. A lot of physical music cannot even find on the internet. So that's why a lot of people are very interested in just coming in and looking at our collection. And he made like kind of DJ sets, and he made radio shows and podcasts about this music from the collection. So that's again a way of getting our collection physical and attended. Another example was a girl, Shiva Fisher-Reiki, a very clever girl from London, who is also a radio DJ, and she was part of BBC. She came over for a week, also browsed in our collection and did the same thing with radio shows and some shows around with a very good attention of our collection. So finally, if I just want to sum up about what we think about, I think as a public library, we have to rethink our role in the local community. In this digital age, we have to be a very important part of the local community, because people are most of us streaming. So we have to do something else for getting our role. Everyone can listen to music everywhere. But the thing is that we actually have to make sure that people actually reflect on music, because one thing is that you can actually listen to music 24/7 hours, but maybe not putting so much attention what you listen to. It's the public library's role to actually make people understand and reflect on the music, and so that's also a very important role, I think. And so we can help also broadening and widening the understanding of what music is right now in the moment, and also what it used to be, retrospective, the history of music, and also where it is heading. So that is some of the very important part of the public library as we see it here in Odense, and that's how we want to make a healthy ecosystem from our side.
Thank you so much. As I think I was saying to someone else in the chat, I think that's the least expected library poster I think I've ever seen. So yeah, I think we should definitely recommend metal library posters for future use. That's fantastic. I think, I don't know, I'm conscious that, of course, a lot of these are themes that we talk about when talking about public libraries in general, as spaces which are going from sort of passive consumption to real activation and creation of knowledge. And so it's fantastic to see that being done in practice in Odense. Fantastic. So I'm now going to hand over to Enrique to present your work and how your work contributes to this healthy music ecosystem.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm also the chair of the Broadcasting and Orchestra Library section in YAML. And I want, in this first section, just to speak a little about how is our work in an orchestra library, because it is something that is quite uncommon among the different library types, if you want to say so. And what we do here is basically 2 main jobs. The first job, and is the most important job, and the job that uses the most of our time, is to provide the scores for the orchestra. And this is something that you may have or may have not in the library, because the orchestras usually play music on public domain, in which case you may buy this scores and you can have it in the library. But in many cases, you are playing scores that are not in public domain, so you have to rent them. And one may ask, why do you rent this? Because this is not our decision. It's up to the composer to decide how is going to dispose these materials for the orchestra. And in the world of classical music, especially in the world of symphony music, it's the most common situation is to have these scores only on rental. So The scores travels from the editor to the orchestra and then go back to the editor. Besides that, the other main part of our job in the libraries, in the orchestra libraries, is to keep record of everything, because an orchestra, an auditorium, and maybe both, as is in our case here at the Palau de la Música, we have two artistic formations, the Valencia Orchestra, the Valencia Symphony Orchestra, and the Valencia Brass Band. We were formed respectively in 1943 and in 1903. So they are very, very, very old organizations. We have also a different season, a regular season, with orchestras that come abroad for different countries. So we keep record of every activity, the activities of the orchestra, the activities of the brass bands, and the activities that the Palau organized by itself as an auditorium. So we have a collection, a massive collections of concert programs, of course. We do have a very important library of music sheet, but of course we do have a very large archive of photographs, a very interesting archive of administrative documents, and of course we do have recordings in video and audio of most of the concerts that are being performed here, and that the orchestra has performed here and outside here. The part of the job as providing material to the orchestra, it also implies some kind of music knowledge, because it's not only to put the sheet music into the stands. You have to prepare this music according to the instructions of the conductor or the concertmaster. In the second part, I can put you a pair of examples of how this works. And it's important also to keep record of this layer of information, the layer of information that we as librarians put into this discourse, and the layer of information that the musicians during the rehearsals put also into this sheet music, because it's very useful for us for doing future performances of this work in the future. But also I think it's a very interesting source to study the history of performance into classical music, because all these marks are related to how musicians are playing these particular symphonies, and this is something that has changed along the years. A very good example, you have a very good example online in the New York Philharmonic archives, where you can look for and you can watch many of the scores worked by Leonard Bernstein, for example. In every orchestra, we have the most important heritage of our community. In Valencia Orchestra, we have a very important heritage of Spanish and Valencian composers like Joaquín Rodrigo, an example that is from Sagunto, which is a city 20 kilometers north from Valencia, which is the composer of the arch-famous Concerto de Aranjuez, for guitar and orchestra. So this heritage is very underrated in most cases, and is not very well known by the researchers. Okay, we are working to take this into the surface, not only into my orchestra, in many other orchestras. In the US, this is something that is being doing actively. And we are working on a project to put online And we can discuss about that in the second section because there are a lot of IP problems with that. Our part of library, into a website. But that's more or less what we do here as an overview. In the second half, we can talk specifically about IP issues.
Excellent, thank you. And I think I know there's a point as well. Kathleen made a comment as well that I know obviously this function of activating collections is something that is shared and is shared. Public libraries do it, academic research libraries do it. The point of research is to activate information, but also this really dedicated focus on supporting the orchestras based at the Palau is a really powerful one. I think you bring out some really strong points too about the value added, the value that comes from having professionals, from having librarians there, taking care, understanding the process, organizing things, making sure things are preserved. And these are all things that wouldn't happen if there weren't the institutions, if there weren't the professionals to actually staff them. So, and we're going to head on therefore to the second section where we really dig into the intellectual property side of things. I think we've probably got about 10, 12 minutes each to present. So first of all, we're actually going to turn over to Kathleen, who's already been good and active in the Q&A. So over to you, Kathleen.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathleen De Laurenti. I am the director of the Arthur Friedheim Library at the Peabody Institute at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. We are the oldest music conservatory in the United States. I'm going to be talking about a couple of different, I think, priority issues around intellectual property facing all libraries, but in the context of the unique challenges that we're facing in music libraries right now. And one of the first things I want to talk about is digital ownership. So something that is very difficult, I think, for folks to understand. I was just explaining this to a library user on Blue Sky yesterday, is that we can't purchase digital content in the United States legally. This is similar under intellectual property law in other jurisdictions, but we can only license things. And we're starting to see real problems with this in libraries. There have been a few very high profile issues that have arisen recently around ebooks. So I've got a highlight here from a situation where Wiley withdrew 1,300 books from a subscription collection that many of us were providing access to at our organizations without telling anybody. So faculty just loved that. You know, if we were able to choose the materials that we thought were important, purchase them for our collections, and preserve and provide access to them the way we do every other item, this wouldn't be an issue. So this is something that we're actively talking about right now in the United States, especially in coalitions between civil society organizations and libraries. What are the ways that we're dealing with this in music libraries? So Carla gave some previews of what's happening with YAML in conversations around e-scores. We often hear in libraries with intellectual property that music is sort of the canary in the coal mine, right? We had iTunes long before we had Kindle books. And we've seen a lot of the issues that we're now talking about in broader library collections happen around sound recordings first. But ironically, they've happened to scores last. Musicians were the last group that really wanted to move into E in this space. There wasn't very much demand, and publishers have historically held onto the value of their intellectual property by creating artificial scarcity around this material. The merger and collapse of the music publishing industry in many ways has made it very difficult for new young composers to break into the space, for composers who want to retain control of their intellectual property and not transfer it to a publisher. And they've taken advantage of the internet, and they've got their storefronts up and they're publishing things online, and libraries were like, we need to be able to collect this. So the Music Library Association, through the legislative committee when I was co-chair, put together a model for purchase and licensing of digital scores. So this is a model agreement very similar to the one that Theodore Front uses for those of you who purchase musical scores from them in their digital collections. One of the only digital score distributors that makes access to libraries available through their storefront. And this is a baseline for libraries to talk with composers and start to socialize these ideas around, we can't just buy your PDF. We would love to, but we can't. And many composers who are doing this on their own don't know that. So this is both a tool that allows us to collect, but it's also an educational tool to raise awareness amongst the composition and new music community around the unique issues that they need to be aware of if they want to consider libraries part of their market for their product. So we've been using a version of this agreement at Peabody since 2020, fall of 2022, and we have gained access to scores from almost 40 composers by now. The composers that we have not been able to work with mostly just haven't responded to us. It's not that they've said no to working with us with this agreement, they just haven't ever responded to our inquiries. So we found this to be a very successful model, especially working with younger composers and composers from underrepresented communities that are really eager to see their music have a wide reach, and where making their work accessible is a priority for them. I'm in some conversations with folks. My colleague Carrie Masteller at Harvard and I are working on a white paper talking about just sort of the landscape around these issues in music libraries in the United States. So keep an eye out for that. But one of the things we found is that infrastructure is as much of a problem for libraries in this area as the intellectual property issues. So even folks who can deal with the copyright stuff and the licensing don't always have the infrastructure they need to share and lend this. So we're also actively starting some conversations with some projects that might hopefully provide some opportunities for libraries to be able to not have to worry so much about the infrastructure and focus on the collection building for our communities that we care about. Another issue that we're struggling with here in the United States is contract override. So this is a list of countries that have contract override. And when I talk about contract override, what I'm talking about are provisions in the law that say that a publisher or copyright holder can't enter into a contract with libraries that restricts their copyright exceptions under the law. In the United States, we have what's called Section 108 in our copyright law that outlines exceptions for libraries that are focused on allowing us to preserve collections and provide access to those collections for scholarship and learning. But we are often finding ourselves in positions where vendors want to work with us and contract those rights away. And this is becoming increasingly problematic in the race to AI everything. So I wanted to include this list from my colleague, Jonathan Band, who is our lead counsel for the Library Copyright Alliance in the United States, because I think it shows a little bit how far behind we are in the US. Again, this is another area where libraries are actively working with our colleagues in civil society organizations to think about how we can strategize this. With this and digital ownership, a lot of the challenges right now are how to get the ear of our elected officials in a way that's productive for us. I know that many folks feel like the contract override is more important, but there's a part of me that's like, in music, many of the things that we need access to aren't even available to us under contract, right? iTunes won't license to us. We can't work with them. Spotify doesn't have a library license that we can work with. So those contract override benefits in some ways are limited because we're already being excluded as customers from the markets for a lot of the things we've historically collected. So I'm a big proponent that digital ownership is a big part of this, and that digital ownership also matters because digital ownership is for everyone, and collectors included, and individuals know what happens when digital ownership blows up on them. For example, when Microsoft killed their book app and everyone lost access to all the books they had purchased through Microsoft Store. We're also seeing a lot more action on digital ownership nationally on the legislative landscape. So the state of California passed a law recently that said that Places like Amazon can no longer have a buy button for things that you're not actually buying. So when you go to Amazon in the US and you see a film or an album, it says you can rent it or buy it. And they're saying you can't tell people they're buying something when that's not actually the transaction. And Senator Ron Wyden, one of our federal legislators, has kind of taken this up alongside the right to repair movement in the US, and is saying that we need to have some clarity on this and calling for Congress to take some action. So we're hopeful that we're going to make some movement on that side of things. And I will be providing the links to all of these at the end of my presentation. We also recently were asked to contribute some comments to the Copyright Office in the United States around performing rights organizations. So one of our senators went to the Copyright Office and said that they're hearing concerns from their constituents that we have too many performing rights organizations. In the US, we don't have a single collecting society that collects royalties on behalf of musicians. We have multiple performing rights organizations that are separate for composition and for sound recordings. And then we have a whole other compulsory license system for mechanical licensing in the US. These are all managed by different organizations, all have different federal regulations around them. And it's very confusing. The performing rights organizations historically have only dealt with performing rights royalties for composers and publishers. So it's a very narrow segment of things here. And we've gone from having 2 performing rights organizations to 3 for a significant period of time to now 5. And, you know, the folks that need to be working with 5 different performing rights organizations now are everything from sometimes public libraries who play music in their event spaces, to the local cafe, to bars and clubs, to arenas, to universities. So there's a huge number of constituents invested in this conversation. Many universities in the United States have blanket licenses with the performing rights organizations. 3 of the 5 negotiate with an organization called NACUBO on our behalf to set a standard license and a standard licensing fee. But the newer organizations have not been as excited to do that, which means the fees have been higher. And another problem that we have is that we can't always understand who owns all of the rights or controls all of the rights to the music that's being played and performed where we have these licenses in place. So I brought this example up. And you can see here that this is for Kendrick Lamar's well-known diss track, Not Like Us. And this is from BMI's side of looking through the catalog. It tells you how much BMI controls, which is 84.26%, but you're not entirely sure if ASCAP controls all of the rest of that. If you have a license with ASCAP, does that cover everything? It's unclear. Do I also need a GMR license? Do I also need a CSAC license? I had a student who did a recital of all songs by Usher, who's a popular musician in the US, and we had to have 3 different blanket licenses to cover that student's recital. So these are real issues. And there's some real problems with this. And when we submitted a letter from the Music Library Association, along with our colleagues at MOLA, which represents orchestra librarians and other performing arts organizations, we highlighted some of these issues. So a big thing is the lack of transparency around rights management that comes from what we call fractional licensing, which means that there can be 10 people that contributed, 10 publishers and songwriters that contributed to creating a work, and they can all have different PROs representing their interests. And we don't know that or who they are. Not having any way to negotiate standard rates and licenses creates problems, because then we don't know what our different licenses allow us to do, and they may conflict. We may not be able to do everything under one license we can do under another. And if one part of a song is represented by an organization that has a limited licenses, then we're limited to what the most restrictive license allows. This also threatens our ability to ensure compliance. We could do over 1,000 performances at Peabody every year. Just at Peabody. That's not even including all of the other music that's being played on our campus or being performed at other events. Being able to comply with conflicting licenses that are changing all the time, where we don't have transparency of who's controlling what, is not easy. And ultimately, if this continues and we start to see these costs increase and more PROs on the scene, we're going to have to start saying no to some of them. And when we have to start saying no to licenses, that means under a fractional licensing system, that's going to limit the works that we can perform, and that's going to limit people's artistic freedom and academic choice. And we're a well-resourced academic institution. Smaller organizations are going to have to make even harder choices. In 2020, just at the beginning of just at the end of the before times, the Music Library Association worked with the University of Virginia and the University of Michigan to publish a jazz reel book with 300 songs from the public domain with multiple realizations of harmonies. That particular book was created by Chuck Israels and David Berger specifically to solve this issue for musicians, so that jazz musicians could go into the local Italian restaurant and say, I can play music without a license for you. I can bring you great music and use things that don't need to be licensed. You can still hire live musicians, because we're seeing musicians losing work because of this too. So this is a real issue for us. That particular book has seen over 350,000 downloads since it was published, which is pretty exciting. And that shows that we're really making an impact in this space. We also still have some challenges around sharing our collections. So we do have some exceptions under Section 108 in the copyright law. Once you get to the bottom of that section of our federal statutes, there's a little provision that says most of these things don't apply to audiovisual materials or images or other creative works. So we're often stymied. These negotiated PRO contracts that we do have don't include on-demand access. So that means anything we're doing with our institutional collections or preservation collections aren't covered under those licenses. We don't have access to the new compulsory blanket mechanical license. So this still really limits what we can do digitally with our historical collections, even though we've seen some changes in the law. So we're really relying on fair use for much of what we're trying to do here. And fair use is very much being opened for litigation right now, particularly through concerns around AI. And unfortunately, some of the recent lawsuits that our colleagues at the Internet Archive have faced. So it's a little bit of a precarious moment for us here as far as making our collections more widely available. Luckily, I think we're still, everybody's okay to put everything in a black box, but it's not very useful in a black box, right? So if you have questions, I have my email here. And like I said, I'll put all those links in the chat, and I'm happy to provide slides to Stephen afterwards to share with any participants today. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Just run through some of those issues. And I'm guessing a lot of anyone here who works with copyright regularly will have come across these and other things. But I think that point that often there are layers on layers of rights within music that can often make it a far more complicated proposition than other things. The risk of works becoming orphan because you can't identify one rights holder or contact and grows up. I think also that point, which is a really crucial one, about the challenge that refusal to license can play, and there's almost a case, and I know we look at this in other contexts, so actually say, well, is there an antitrust? Is there a competition issue going on here when simply a library isn't able, even if a library is willing to pay and buy, that's not on the table as an option? So I think that coming up, and as you said as well, that music has been in some ways a forerunner. I know that the rise of streaming service, the rise of these new business models was quicker in music than in books, even if, of course, scores have lagged behind a little bit and often get special treatment in law in the first place. So
I'm also working on addressing the score issue too, so keep an eye out for more public domain stuff from us.
Excellent. Yeah, and
hold on to that for so long. Students are getting angry.
I can understand why musicians would be getting angry that they can't access things, but also the coming up that book is such a good sort of positive, constructive contribution, and again, it shows the value add of having libraries and librarians there. So I'm going to head on now to Niels to talk about the experiences from the public library perspective and working with copyright.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's a really good topic for this webinar. I'm really happy that that you invited us for this, because it's actually a thing we talk a lot about also in the library system. I mean, how can we keep the balance between that we actually present like upcoming musicians. So one part of the important thing is to keep them open, so to give them some attention, and the other side also make sure that they actually do get some kind of royalties to make a living for it. Because the thing as a library from my side is that what we are good at is to create the attention and the presentation of musicians and collections. We don't have the great economy to do a lot of promotion or a lot of royalty paying for them, and that's a really interesting balance to try to find. Because on the other side, it's very important for a healthy ecosystem that the people who actually try to live on the music actually get some royalties about it. So it's a really important balance to do that. So and that also not about when we do content. We are all very much aware of how to do that with the money. And another important thing is, of course, to promote like old retrospective music. As I said before, I think one of the very important parts of a library is also to present the past. It's not only what happens right in the music scene right now, but also to go back to see what actually happened like 50 years ago or 30 years ago. World music, as the good example with the guys who came to do our collection. So there's also some problems with how can we actually do some promotion of this old historic music on our website platforms. Because the good things about a library is that we can create a hybrid between the digital platforms and the physical platforms, or the physical rooms, spaces, where we can actually do some very interesting interaction to promote artists. So one of our issues is, for example, how can we actually promote the music online via digital platforms? A good example of one of our issues is that we do a series of articles which is called Band in Your Town, which is interviews with local bands from Odense, which we promote both as SoMe via social media and also via platforms. And then we do concerts with them. But the thing that we could actually be really good to do is, of course, how can we promote their music to the digital part of the hybrid, if you know what I mean. So that is actually one of the things I think it's very interesting to think about. How can we actually promote music via our online digital platforms? And one other thing, which is also back to what I showed you before, was the event that we call Six Portals, which is an example of how we actually record music. That was where the two bands were actually playing and doing a unique new work in our library space. And of course, it was 6 hours of very interesting space rock. But the thing is that we couldn't really promote it because of the copyright. So in my thought, it could be that a potential solution could be something about that, allowing artists to control whether the music is accessible through the library's digital resources. So to sum up, I think it's really it's a very important balance, because you really have to make sure that the artists get the money can actually live on the business, because they're commercial. Library is not a commercial place; it's a non-commercial. But we have other strengths. But we have to respect the kind of thing. So, and that could maybe be a solution to give the artists more rights, and actually give the legislation for public libraries to do their promotion. And another very interesting thing that actually came up earlier here in the webinar was about e-scores. I know it's another subject, but I think it's something we had talked a lot about in the IAML public library section, because some countries are very much good at doing the e-scores thing. In Denmark, we used to have e-scores in our system, but of economic reasons, we had to stop doing it, even though we have a lot of people who actually wish to get the possibility to get e-scores. So it's also a very interesting issue, I think, about copyright. And some countries have said, I know YAML has much more success in that than we have here from Denmark. I think that was just about what I wanted to say. Yeah,
Great.
that's it.
Thank you for highlighting that, and I think that's I think that point about balance is there. I was looking at WIPO's World Intellectual Property Day website, and that underlines that word balance about how can you making sure that we're providing something of value. I think that point, nonetheless, that actually the shop window, the exposure that we can offer, it's hard to put a cash value on it, but it does have a cash value. And I think it's also one of this is part of the discourse that we have around copyright in general, that at its extreme, copyright and highly protective copyright can actually be harmful, because in the end it stands in the way. It prioritizes short-term gain over long-term gain, over achievement of public interest goals. And so the example around preservation is key, that typically this is work that it doesn't have a market anymore, but just because it doesn't have a market, it doesn't mean it doesn't have value. And unless you're enabling libraries to do that, I think also you raise a key point that probably isn't about copyright. It's about the business models that have been built around copyright that lead to a situation where a band can't allow you to give access to their things because they're expected to sign away rights. And so I know it's interesting. I know we also focus on open access, where this topic of rights retention is a thing there. And so again, seeing this sort of parallel between what's happening in the academic world, but actually also what's happening in the public library, in the non-academic world as well, is really interesting.
Yeah,
excellent.
That's a really good book. A book called Free Ride by Robert Levine, who actually talks about this, which is actually he said that how the internet can be kind of a parasite, because if the artist doesn't get royalties for what they're actually doing, you cannot make a living of the culture, and that will be negative for the culture. So it is a really important issue for sure.
Yeah, and in all these things, it's about finding that balance, that more voices are being discovered than ever before, which is a good thing. But you can't, publicity doesn't buy food. So excellent, thank you. So I'm now going to hand over to Enrique for your presentation. Then I think we'll have a few minutes at the end for Q&A and discussion.
Okay,
that's good now.
Perfect. So just a very brief and a very schematic explanation of how this basically works. And I think that in the audience there are a lot of participants that are familiar with this. But anyway, I want to just explain for everybody how this works in the symphony orchestra. Okay, from the programming to the performance, we have, as I said before, two choices mainly. In Spain, all composers deceased before 1944, and composers has already an asterisk because there is not only the composer, maybe there is a librettist, maybe there is an arranger. The last responsible of this particular work is deceased before 1944. Then the work is considered as public domain, with a lot of asterisks also, because maybe the composer is in public domain, but maybe this particular work is not, because you want to perform a specific edition, which is protected by the editor. So this is only in a very general way. Once you have clear that you have to license the music, what are you licensing really is the access to the music, not the music itself. Okay, you are paying to have right to have the sheet music that is provided normally, usually in paper. Digital scores, it's like nuclear fusion, no? It's always 5 years ahead. But I was very confident in 2009 or 2010 when the iPad came up to the field, that digital scores were about the corner. No, they are going to be an immediate release, but time has shown me that this is not going to be the case. First, because still we don't have the right hardware. We have the right hardware for the players, for the musicians, but we don't have really the right hardware for the conductor. The conductor needs a more big piece than the biggest tablet you can find. Maybe there are one specific model, but it's hard to put a general score, a conductor score, into an A4 format, which is the format of the biggest iPad. But the real reason is that editors don't want to. Editors are very remorse, no, of what happened, I think, and this is my opinion, with other aspects of the music, like into recording companies, and they don't want to be involved in a movement like that, no? And of course, if digital scores don't move all in the same standards, this is not going to work, because you can't have different devices or different programs for different composers or different editors. It has to be the same. And they have to be not in PDF, but in Music XMR, because this is the difference between having a PDF or having a Word. You need to edit, to mark, you need to interact with the score, and you are not going able to do that with a PDF, which is a static photo, no, of the music. Okay, so basically, a composer agrees with the publishing and the distribution of the music to an editor or a publisher. The editor then gets the rights of licensing and distribution, and the editors in Europe agrees to local agents to work in different countries. This is now probably unnecessary, but it's very hard to undo, because there are many years of contracts that came from the beginning of the 20th century. So when I rent a piece, when I rent an example, a chamber piece, I have to ask to my local agent of chamber, Universal Music in Vienna, to ask Vienna to provide them the score, and then they are going to provide me the score to put it on the stands. And then all the score is going to move back again to Vienna, okay? Of course, this, as I said before, only covers the access to the music. If you are going to do any performance, you are going to pay to ASCAP, you are going to pay to SGAE in Spain, to any collecting society that is operating in your country. Except in the case that is grant right. As they say, in that case, you are going to pay directly to the editor. Grant right is, opera, zarzuela, it's anything, they say that it's anything, any performance with a dramatic and musical character. Okay? I put that on the chat about the first half of the presentation. If you want to learn more about our job as music librarian, you can check out this video from Margarita Chaume, which is my colleague here. It's in Spanish, but in YouTube you can put subtitles to translate it in any language. Okay, so there is a there and back again. As I said, the license allows you to access the score. This is not the finish of the work, because we have to work on these scores before put it into the stands. No, we do an optimization work on these scores because, as you probably know, in example, all the strings, the violin, the viola, the cello, and the bass need something called bows because a particular note can be played in this way or can be played in this way, but they all need to play in the same way. It cannot be up to the musician to choice, no? This is something that has to be unified. There is a lot of more things, no? But this is the most obvious one. And so what we do is try to do all this work in order that the first rehearsal go as smooth as possible, with all the instructions for the conductor, for the concertmaster, and they, during rehearsals, they do a very more profound work, no? And finally, the concerts travel back to the editor. This is an example of what we found here. Here is how the scores arrives to the library, and then we do some work on this. This is particularly these are bowings, are marking up bowing, and then during the rehearsal they try to correct things. They are not much corrected, so I think that we did a good job here. Anyway, but this layer of information, really, it's not from the editor, it's our layer. So it's very important for us to keep this layer, okay? Because it's a lot of work during this, making this job. And it's also, as I said in the first half, very important for us to replay this work in the future and also to learn about how music is played along the years. No? So we keep a copy of the first stand of all instruments in order to have a record, no, of this. Okay. And finally, I want to discuss just how orchestras are in the local communities and IT hub and amplifier, no? Because all classical and conservatory music in our community and every community where there is an orchestra, the orchestra is like a center of gravity of what happens, no, into classical music, and we keep here music from every composer because every composer wants the music to be played, and they come here to the library with the scores in order to show that to the conductor, to the management, and we keep them here. Many of these scores that get here to the library are not published. There are there are just manuscripts or mechanoscripts, copies of this, and in many cases, the libraries are the only way to find this music. I can give you an example. José Iturbi was a very prominent Valencian musician, especially active in the 1950s, and he was very active in New York, in the New York Philharmonic, around 1930s and 1950s. In 2020, during the pandemic, was his 150th anniversary of his birth, and we wanted to perform one of his works, but the work wasn't published by anybody. But fortunately, New York Philharmonic had a copy of this work, and contacting them, we could finally play by the first time in Spain that particular music. There are also two projects that I want just to talk about, which are special. This is the ATIL project, which is held by IAML, the Spanish YAML branch, which is a project that tries to do a collective catalog of symphonic Spanish and Latin American music, because in the regular catalogs where you can find all the classical music to perform, and you can find what is published, which is their instrumentation. not all the music is represented. Of course, the canonical music is represented, and it depends on the publisher is represented, in example, Anglo-Saxon music or German music. But we didn't have a catalog of our own about Spanish and Latin American music, and we try to do that. It's online. You can check it out into the IADOM website. And Música a la Llum, which in Spanish, in English will be Music to the Light, which is a project about brass bands and music societies here in Valencia. And music societies in Valencia is quite an important phenomenon. And we have 40,000 musicians to a population of 3 million people. They have an interesting and beautiful archives in every society, but it's very endangered. And I want to put you an example. This happened in Valencia. This is part of the floods, and maybe you have heard about in October 29th. And this is the brand new local of Algemesí Music Society. And as you can see, everything was destroyed, and with no possibility of rebuild practically anything. A lot of the scores were lost. Many scores, they are trying to recover them into the Polytechnic University, but we don't have many hopes that all this heritage could be recovered. So I have to emphasize that it's important to keep all these heritage preserved, digitized, and put in this position, no, and put in public. Okay, and that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and again, fantastic presentation underlining things. I think that's in particular complemented very well what Kathleen was saying at the beginning about the complexity of licensing, and I know probably shouldn't be saying this, but obviously a goal of the licensing should reduce transaction costs, not increase them. And sometimes, especially with the sort of the complexity and the multiplication of different licenses within that becomes a concern that actually library resources and other resources are going on transaction, on administration, rather than to the people who've created in the first place.
I tend to be empathical with composers and with IP rights, no, because the IP right is the only right with an expiration date. So yeah, I tend to be empathical with them, no. Sometimes it's true, they are obscure in the contracts. There are things, in example, if you premiere a play in a particular country, you have to pay 50% more. So this encourages really to premiere things, no? It should be the opposite, maybe. But okay, it is what it is.
No, but I think it was the other point I was going to make, building on that there's this sort of key role of libraries and a key role of the institutions that they support in, I suppose, removing the hard edges of the copyright system and helping to avoid some of the absurdities that it can lead to if it's taken to an extreme. So, the fact that, I know, as Kathleen was saying, that musicians can't take on gigs, they can't take on work because it's too complicated to clear the rights to play anything. What Niels was saying about the impossibility of not being able to promote new and emerging bands because it doesn't work. So that sort of function of libraries, and of course the copyright provisions that they rely on in order to actually make sure that we're avoiding dysfunction, we're avoiding failures in the market, and we're avoiding missing opportunities to do something that makes the music ecosystem healthier. So I can see in the chat. So first of all, thank you to Elizabeth Nowland for plugging the Major Orchestra Librarians Association conference. But so do take a look at that. She's been sharing information there. There's a direct question to Niels about any sort of brief tips around planning and organizing events. I think what I might do then to close, because we are coming up to time, is then ask each of our participants to think about one message that you would like to give to the broader music sector And then one message that you would give to any copyright office or other bit of government reflecting on what sort of copyright reforms may be necessary to help libraries realise their potential to support a healthy music ecosystem. So I'll start by going to Niels, because there was that direct question that's been sitting in the Q&A.
Sorry, yeah, here we are. Yeah, regarding the question, very good question. I think we use very much partnerships, and we use very much volunteers, and we use a concept which I mentioned earlier, like what we call takeover. So we actually give our trust to also people from the outside to come in and create with us. So in that way, a lot of our events is actually based on different people, creative people who want to come in and add to the different kinds of events. So, but of course, it takes some work. My job here in Odense, I didn't say it. I'm a consultant in music and cross-disciplinary event management, which is that I work with connections and networking with people from both the local area but also national. So it's actually very much based on that people want to come in and do something with us in the library. So even though it can take quite a long time to coordinate, it actually works really well because people really want to be part of it. And I think that's the fruit about letting people come in and do some takeover where they can actually create what they wish, some ideas. So that's so that was hopefully a good answer for that. I think about the copyright thing, and what my advice would be would definitely be that the thing to be to make a solution where the artists upcoming, for example, could come in and control whether music is accessible through the library's resources. So in somehow they could actually be give the rights to actually promote the music via online websites, and also when they do a unique recording in the room, that they actually got the what do you call it, the rights to actually control it to us. I think that would be my reply on that for sure.
Excellent. Thank you, and also for sort of moving on there. And I think also that it's a point that's relevant for libraries in general. Just some of those stories of successful partnerships and getting people to see libraries as much as a platform or a portal is a really crucial one that I think applies to all sorts of libraries as well, in fact. Excellent. So now I will hand over to Carla. So a message to the broader music sector, message to copyright reformers.
I think a key is to work on collaboration, to work together, to find ways to work through the problems that we have. Focusing on what Kathleen said about the mechanics, to come up with ways to offer digital scores, to work on the infrastructure, to support what we do.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a really, I'll sum up at the end. I won't intervene now. Thank you. Excellent. Kathleen, so to the sector, to governments.
I think that one of my biggest concerns right now is that we have ended up in a system where, and I think this is true in many, if not most, or all of our jurisdictions, where corporations have become the flag bearer for representing the interests of musicians, composers, and songwriters in our communities. But we now have a system where they're always paid first, and our creative collaborators are always paid last. And this is a problem in the system right now. And I think we need more balance in the system that is putting artists first and the real rights of artists first, and not letting corporate interests insert themselves in the middle there and siphon off all of the income for all of the creative folks in our communities. I will never forget my favorite quote from the Internet Archive oral arguments on appeal, where the lawyer for the publishers asserted that if publishers were not generating revenue, no author would ever write a book again. So I think that this is the quiet parts are being said very much out loud now, and this is the environment we're in. And what I want to say to my library colleagues is that there's a role for us to play to shift this balance. I made a comment in the chat about looking at economic models for open education. This is what we did for our public domain songbook, We generated revenue through that through a combination of library support and individual support, compensated those arrangers and composers up front, and that book is now free for everyone to use. There are different models, and librarians can play a role in looking at those different models while also advocating for a more fair and balanced system for all of us.
Excellent. I don't know, yeah. Not getting trapped in the business model and the logic that the business model imposes is really excellent. And then Enrique.
Well, I think that we as symphonic orchestras are part of a very consolidated system. This system was formed about 19th century, second half. There is a very excellent book called the Europeans, and that explains it very, very well how all the copyright system was created and why. It maybe it needs to evolve because things are going very fast and internet has revolutionized a lot of things. But in classical music, and I am speaking just and solely about classical and symphony music, because chamber music is a different issue. In symphony music, this is a right, you know. It's a ceremony. You can see it from the dress, you can see it from the respect to the conductor, you can see it from it's hard to introduce new things here. I don't expect to see things changing in the foreseeable future. Sorry, in the next future, and not in particular in classical and symphony music, but I do agree that things are getting unfair for the street musician, if you want to say, to the lower part, the lower level, no, of this building, no. We are kind of in a privileged position because we don't have any problems with budget. We don't have any problems with paying this kind of things. We are part of this system.
Excellent, thank you. And I think, in terms of themes coming out there, in particular that one about actually, remembering where this came from and what the original logic behind the application of copyright was, although of course, to some extent not forgetting that a key driver of the original Berne Convention was the interests of the publishers who came together to push it. And Victor Hugo was a useful figurehead for this, but remembering how to make sure this is a system that actually benefits the people who are creating and the users, and also simply remembering that often they are one and the same thing. They're one and the same person a lot of the time. I think all those points about collaboration are extremely strong. I know it's a concern that we have, that copyright very easily becomes conflictual, very easily looks like a zero-sum game, and actually stepping outside of that and looking for those opportunities to work together and to sort of sidestep those elements that are not working, which are ultimately often based on business models, and ultimately often based on the fact that many copyright debates, but music in particular, too easily becomes a fight between Universal and YouTube. And that's not a fight where, in the end, musicians, users, listeners end up, they're just sort of collateral damage in the middle of that, and often that smaller creators as well. So I think that those are a really positive messages to end on. I think that I think this has been a really good sort of exploration of those different functions. I hope that everyone listening feels that we've had the opportunity really to explore those different aspects, but I think there's some really useful core themes in there about that fundamental role that libraries play, that fundamental potential that they have to really support the function, to support the ability of of the music sector, to the music ecosystem to be healthy. I can see that Anders has his hand up, and of course I know Anders is from IAML, so I'm just going to promote him to panelist, so I think he can say a couple of final words as the Secretary General of IAML. So he will join us while he sort of comes through backstage and then joins us on the main stage. So he will be there in a minute. But I think given that I will, okay, he's not, okay, that's it, he didn't want to be. So I saw the hand go up and the request to talk. So in which case I will say thank you very much to all of you, to Carla, to Kathleen, to Niels, to Enrique. Thank you so much. I think there have been requests for slides, so if it's possible to share slides, we'll collect those, we'll share them alongside the recording up on our website, and of course pass that on to colleagues at IAM, at YAML, so that you can also share it through your channels. But thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for coming along, and of course happy World IP Day tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.